Hello, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of Big Red Doors, the video teaching series hosted by myself, Taylor Sullivan, and our rector in the interim at St. Mark's on the Campus Episcopal Church, Father Chuck Peak. I'm here today with Angel Silcott to talk about a very pressing topic, one that this month actually recognizes, that being suicide prevention. My background in the church was filled with much turmoil and stress, a lot of mental health struggles. And I know that's also be the case for my friend here, Angel Silcott. So we thought it'd be a good idea, with September being Suicide Prevention Month, to sit down, tell our stories, and talk about the hope that we have in Christ for this struggle and this reality in the world that we live. Angel, would you like to tell us a little bit about your background, your upbringing, and yourself?
Sure. So I grew up in a Christian home. My mom was very devout Christian, but my dad was a Buddhist. And there was a lot of marital strife between them, and it caused a lot of stress for me early on. My dad was in and out of jail, and it was that whole thing was the root of a lot of anxiety and depression that I still deal with today. I first had thoughts of being comfortable with death as early as the age of 7. I actually remember clearly one day after a really bad fight, I was just laying on the floor in my room, trying to calm myself down and thinking that it would be better if when I went to sleep that I didn't wake up, that I didn't want to wake up if this is what things were going to be like. Those intrusive thoughts just kept getting worse as I got older, and a couple of times in my early teenage years, I remember standing at the window and thinking about just throwing myself out of the second story window of my room, because I didn't know how to deal. We weren't really allowed to tell anybody about what we were dealing with, and so we're pressing all of this, trying to keep the struggles we had about how mom was feeling, how we were feeling, what dad was failing at as a dad. It was just too much. I didn't feel like I could talk to a pastor. I didn't feel like I should feel this way. I was so ashamed of my weakness in my eyes, of the depression, which I didn't actually have a word for it when I was a teenager. Nobody talked to me about mental health at all. When I went to college the first time in Tennessee, I was 23, and it was in passing from the orchestra teacher, Dr. Griffin, who actually looked at me and said, "You're depressed, aren't you, Angel?" I'm like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "You are depressed. You need to read this book, and I think you need help." I left that college shortly after, but his words really got to me. And so I started reading everything I could. I looked into what I was feeling, and finally came to terms with the fact that thinking about death as much as I was thinking about wanting to die was not normal. But in all my time in church, I had heard over and over again, if you're struggling with these feelings, it's because something's not right in your life. You need to get it right. And I would try so hard. I would pray. I would get rid of things that I thought were stumbling blocks. I would try to do something good for other people. I was in ministry from the time I was 17 until I moved out at 25. So like I wasn't just a pew sitter. I was in my Bible. I was teaching Sunday school, but the entire time I would go home and I would lie in bed and cry because I just didn't want to do life anymore. I still have those thoughts periodically, just because with the clinical depression, it's never going to go away. The intrusive thoughts are never going to go away. And I have made my peace with that. And I've learned different things with praying and meditating and grounding myself that have helped. But after I had my son, the postpartum depression was really bad. And I really didn't have anybody at the church I was at that I felt like I could talk to there either. It's actually been people I've worked with that have reached out when they've noticed that something's wrong. I do have a couple good friends that if I'm having a low day, I can reach out to, like you, or another friend, Cameron. Like I can say, today just really sucked. And my husband has helped me tremendously as well. He's put up with a lot with all this stuff, and I appreciate that a lot.
Wow. Thank you for how transparent you were with that. This, similarly, a lot of my mental health issues also came from my childhood. I was raised in the church as well. Father Chuck refers to me as being born to be an Anglican because I was raised Pentecostal and kind of a Pentecostal Methodist, and also occasionally attending my grandparents' Catholic church. Then later on, I went to a Lutheran church and went to Grace, which is Mennonite still, which was, Mennonites in its doctrine quite a bit, while attending a Baptist church and working in a non-denominational. So I've been all across the board, Missouri Synod Lutheran and ELCA. And now I work in an Episcopal church and also attend there. So even theologically, my upbringing was very confusing. But as a kid, I was very devout in my faith. When I got to middle school, I went to the School for the Blind, 5 hours away from my family. I had to ride a bus 5 hours there on Sunday evenings and come back 5 hours Friday afternoons. We stayed there all week long, which for many people was great. It gave them a lot more opportunity to work on independent living skills that they might need. I had already been working on those. But it also presented the issue with a lack of funding and staffing, that some students would not be attended to adequately. One day, following forensics practice, I had stayed around to listen to one of my friends rehearse. On the way back, I needed to use the restroom on the way back to our dorm. We were going to go through the tunnels that connect the campus as we normally would. And I was abused at that point. Being as sheltered as I was as a child, I had no idea what had happened or even that it was wrong. All I knew was that everybody else around me was making a big deal out of it. He kept telling me, you need to tell a judge in court what happened. This person's evil, you'll never talk to them again. And I had to spend the rest of the year sleeping in the the school's health center in one of the infirmary rooms. My stuff would occasionally be brought there. It would, piece by piece be brought there. And I still had no idea what was going on. I had no idea what was going on in its entirety until about 3 years later, until I was a sophomore in high school. This happened the second semester of my 7th grade year. And throughout that whole time, it was very confusing. It was also during the time where the thing that had happened was becoming a real hot topic in the church. Being gay is wrong. Being gay damns you to hell. And I also had to go through the struggle in establishing, okay, this is who I am over the next 4 years. That's okay, this is who I am. You don't like it, I don't care. But also, I know it's not because of the abuse that happened. And that caused, on top of the depression that I was already facing before I went to the school for the blind, compounded. And the place where I always found my security and all of my fellowship and stability in the church was not a place I could go. It made me feel like I was in a big whirlwind and I had no idea what to do. And it wasn't until the last couple of years where, actually, I would say probably my sophomore year at Grace, where I started finding people that truly invested in me, starting with Richard Ang and Ryan Pramberg and Alex Newby, people that really pushed me. Even Obed Gomez, another one of our friends. My main love language is physical touch, and Obed, in my reluctance to give him a hug when he would try to, I would push him away with fervor and aggression. Kept trying, whether he meant it this way or not in its effect. It eventually made me open up to hugging him back. And that was a huge milestone in realizing, okay, I have walls that are up and they need to come down. It was just a huge thing that wasn't okay, and it still isn't. The scars are deep and they probably will never entirely heal, but there are things that you realize throughout it. And ultimately, I found that my struggles have helped me to work with a lot of the youth I worked in youth ministry with, in camps, even to understand people I live with and other classmates and coworkers better, to not be as dismissive of their struggles. Sure, I'm still an abrasive person. I have a very bold personality, as I know you appreciate, as I do yours. But still being able to understand where they're coming from, so I don't just see them as completely worthless because they're struggling, like many do to those of us that struggle.
I think going through that level of trauma that we have, it gives us an empathy for people who are struggling and really trying to improve themselves, not just anybody who's dropped themselves in the hole of their own volition, but people who, because of life, because of family, things that have happened to them, have found themselves feeling like a tiny fish in a giant ocean with no end in sight. We feel sympathetic towards them because we felt that way.
Sorry, I was speaking of roommates and being patient with them. I can hear a loud noise from his TV, and I was telling him to be quieter because I know it's picking up in our recording. So give me just a second here to tell him that. But yeah, have you? I know that your walk with the church has been a troubling one as well.
Yeah. Um, in the church itself, in the people,
Both, I
I
believe.
think, I think at this point, I have absolutely no faith in the church because of these different things. At one point, I had to deal with somebody who was trying to abuse my sisters, like physical altercation. And I had to threaten to leave my job at 16, by the way, in order for them to get this person out of the church. And that's just one instance in a list of many, many that have happened. However, I would like to say that I still trust God despite all the garbage that's happened to me, because there's only so much that God can do against the stupidity of mankind. And it's these people's decisions that have hurt me and you and others like us. And I think if I were to say anything to the church leadership who might watch this, is that there needs to be a wake-up call to the actual needs of the people. we get, they're so focused on the micro issues, the things of unimportant tradition of their different denominations, or the things that really are never going to be solved here on earth, and not trying to help people. When Christ was here, he wasn't trying to push an agenda. He was here to love and to help people work through their problems and to heal. And obviously, like, physical healing is not always an option, but emotional healing, we should be working with people to help them heal emotionally in order for them to help others heal.
Exactly. Give me 1 second. I'm going to pause this recording. Now we are. Okay, and we're back. Sorry, we had to take a quick pause there. That will probably appear pretty jittery in the actual publishing. There's no clean way to edit that. But coming back, you mentioned no faith in the church. I mean, no trust in the church any longer. That meaning the earthly church, not the Church of Christ.
Exactly.
But you also mentioned, and I love that you clarified this, that although you don't have trust in the human church, you have nothing but trust in Christ himself.
Right.
How has that dichotomy been built? What does that mean, and what does that look like for you?
Over the last couple of years, I've spent a lot of time just studying. And my early years were really built on like what other people believed and were telling me was true. My mom, and I'm thankful for this, was always one who would pull out the concordance and really do deep studies.
A word study right there.
Really, yeah. Like my whole childhood, I remember if she heard something weird in the church, she'd look it up. She'd be like, "That's wrong, we're leaving." And she still will do that, and I appreciate that. But
my mom was the first. Sorry, go ahead.
I've seen a lot over the past few years. Especially, I come from Independent Fundamental Baptist as the longest church I've been with, and like 80% of what I was hearing come from the pulpit was not from the Bible. It was, they take a verse, and instead of actually like deconstructing it,
they'd eisegete it.
Yeah, they'd isolate it and shove their own opinions into it.
They Joel Osteen it.
Exactly, and they would be anybody who is from the denomination.
They would hate you if you said that.
Right, and I'm probably going to get a lot of backlash for this.
I'm sorry. For those who are also watching, we're also joined here by Angel's husband and also a good friend of mine, Caleb. If you'd like to lean in for a moment and let us see you. Hello, Caleb. Caleb is actually how I met Angel at Grace. But yeah, my mother was similar in that, except she was a first-generation Christian. So she looked up to another woman in the church very much, and that led to what we've now learned to be not heresy by any means, but beliefs that were inspired by the Bible, but not from it.
Right.
So my own shameless plug, current issue that I've been fighting friends about, homosexuality being inspired by the biblical ideal of marriage, but not being written as it is. But that's beside the point, and I will not get any more into that tonight. I promise.
For another video.
Actually, if you would like to learn about pride in the church, we made a video about that about 2 months ago in June. You can check it out in our the playlist on SMOC Lincoln on YouTube, where I am joined by Nick England from UNI. But enough with the shameless plugs. speaking of that, you found trust and security in Christ in possibly one of the most difficult struggles we have here on earth.
Yeah. In my last year of high school, I realized that I really couldn't trust anybody. I didn't want to trust anybody, and I needed something. And literally, the relationship I've had with God, rocky as it's been at some points in my life, has been the only thing that's kept me afloat. It's the times I've gotten in trouble in my life are when I have allowed outside influences of religion to help me make decisions. I mentioned that I went to a college in Tennessee, and I was more or less pressured into dating an individual who was a bit of a narcissist and would gaslight me. And on the topic of suicide, he basically controlled me by saying that he needed to do certain things for him or he would commit suicide. And while I'd like to point out that I struggled for several years of performing self-harm on my feet because I knew that was an area where people wouldn't see. And I knew what the suicidal tendencies were, and it took him breaking up with me the first time because I was not godly enough. Me taking him back, and then I finally broke up with him almost a year after we first started dating. And that was probably the most traumatizing thing that happened to me in recent times. I still deal with backlash from that, and it was because I was being pushed into going into the mission field and pushed into being a teacher and pushed into all these sort of things, and he was the one who fit what they wanted me to be, and they didn't support women serving in ministry on their own. I've since realized that my gifts and my abilities weren't really meant for ministry, but for other things. And I was not strong enough in what I felt for my own future to make those decisions.
So in this, but all these things have worked to build you into who you are today.
Yeah.
A strong person with a strong voice for those who are hurting. An advocate, somebody who perseveres, somebody who's empathetic, but also not a pushover. And those are ultimately, in my opinion, what the church needs, what this world needs, the true signs of a leader. What I found is that people who have the greatest of struggles are those who end up being those who can most help others. In John 14:6, no, that's the wrong passage. James 1:2, I believe is where it says, count all trials as blessings, for through them you build perseverance. And that's something that both of us have had to go through. We've gone through many trials, and God has taken them and used them. In the church, for both of us, it's where we found our stability, our norm, our home, willingly or not. It was our norm and our center through our upbringing. And in our times of struggle, it seemed like it was against us. But I counted it great joy that even in that midst, the Lord showed us both that with what was going on, it wasn't him that was failing us. It was his people. And that isn't something up against the church at all. We as humans, we all sin. We all fail. and none of us are perfect. As also mental health is the result of. It's the result of the same fall that makes us unable to be perfectly there for one another or be perfect in general. Coming to know you two, which was a huge blessing for me. I mean, Caleb was a bit odd at first, so was I. But that humor and that different personality helped me to grow and find a sense of hope and strength and perseverance, and even just an idea that things could get better through my knowing both of you. And ultimately, that is what happens. It's different for everybody, but it will get better. That doesn't mean that you will have nothing but happiness, joy, sunshine, and rainbows your whole life. No, life is hard. So for anybody watching this, know that you're not alone. God does love you. And there are always people out there, although they might not be nearby and you might not meet them today or tomorrow. There are people out there. You need to set sail and you will find friends that will truly be there through everything. In the meantime, and even past that time, you have somebody already. You have Christ. And although he may sometimes feel far, he is always there right beside you, not leading from the front, not following from behind, but walking alongside you every step of the way, waiting to hear your name, and hear you call his name, and longing to know you and for you to know him, to build that relationship. I'm glad that we have a hope and assurance even through the struggles that we've both gone through. Sorry about that little rant, but I'm glad that there is a way. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, very much.
What would you say to anybody struggling with these things now, or that ever will?
It's hard to not give into that temptation and to either commit emotional suicide by just cutting yourself off from everybody you know, or literal suicide. But if you can push through, you may be able to help somebody else. And what better way to get revenge on life and the people who have hurt you and the things that have hurt you than to live a good life and a great life and do something amazing with it. It's not going to be easy. It's never easy.
Amen. The basket case can free a nation, can start a new world. At you, Moses. Never count yourself out. There's always a hope and always a way. Although it might not always be clear, it will be there. Thank you for joining me today, Angel and Caleb. And thank you all for watching. Join us every Wednesday at 3 p.m. here on SMOC Lincoln on YouTube for a new episode of Big Red Doors. Starting next week, we will be starting part 2 of our video teaching series of 3 parts. So in this, we'll get more in depth in topics in the ministry, mission, and what it looks like for your day-to-day life of how faith works. Thank you for joining us again. Thank you both again. I'll talk to you later.